My name is Leroy Brown, and welcome to Bridging the Gap. I will be your host tonight, and we have a very serious topic that we will all be relating to, that everyone can relate to. But before I get into the topic itself, I'm going to have each person identify who they are and tell us what role they play in domestic violence. And I'm going to start on my left, your right. Pat.
Hi, my name is Pat Fiaccato. I am the chairperson this year for Citizens Against Abuse.
I am Reverend Elmer Harris, and I am the co-chair with Citizens Against Abuse.
Hi, my name is Ryan Lawrence. I'm an executive director at Heart Haven Outreach, and I am on the panel this year for Citizens Against Abuse.
Hi, I am Erin Carlson, and I am a mental health counselor at Family Counseling Service in Aurora, and I facilitate domestic violence offender groups.
I'm Dr. Sandra Carlson, and I'm president of Sandra Carlson Associate Counseling Services here in Bolingbrook, and I do marriage counseling and relationship counseling as well as individual mental health counseling.
Pat, could you give us a little history on this program and actually on the organization itself? We've been in existence, 18 years? Mm-hmm. 18 years. Tell us, what is this all about? What makes this so important right now?
So this organization started 18 years ago, as you're right, as you say, in October. Traditionally, we always have a march and rally in October. That's Domestic Violence Month. Originally, our group was called Take Back the Night of Northern Will County. About 3 years ago, we committee-wide decided that we were going to broaden our spectrum just outside of just domestic violence to look at and investigate and raise awareness about the various different types of violence and abuse there are in society. So we changed our name to Citizens Against Abuse. We still hold the March and Rally in October annually every year. And every year we choose a different topic. This year our topic is going to be relationship ABCs, healthy versus unhealthy.
Oh, okay, Reverend Harris, you've been in it for quite a while itself too.
Well, you know something, when we talk about Citizens Against Abuse, it hits home because, I'm also with the police department, and sometimes I get called out on domestics. And you see so many things that go on, and when you talk about abuse happens in more than just a man and a wife. It happens between a friend, two friends together. It could happen between kids that just go to school that don't know each other. I mean, it's so much when you talk about abuse. Abuse is bullying. Abuse is elderly. Abuse is those that are mentally handicapped. Mm-hmm. I mean, when you talk about abuse, you see it in so many different genres when we address it now as Citizens Against Abuse, we're able to reach out to all of those areas than being just stagnant to saying, well, we're about abuse, but it's only in this area. Because today they have now opened up the realm of abuse that even men are afraid sometimes to go home to their wives because their wives are abusive. Mm-hmm. So that's what Citizens Against Abuse is all about.
Mm-hmm. Ryan, are you the executive director of H2O? How does H2O play into this?
Yeah, so I've been attending these rallies for 9 years now with Heart Haven Outreach. We've been bringing groups of students out to the rally to learn about what domestic abuse is and what they can do about it. We run support groups every Tuesday night, so for the past 9 years, almost every Tuesday, I've been in support groups with high school students. They're open topics. Students can share whatever it is that they're struggling with, whatever they might be needing some support with. But almost always the students are talking about relationship issues, whether it be with boyfriend, girlfriend, interpersonal relationships with their friends, or family members, parents, siblings. And it's a struggle for a teenager because they're trying to figure out who they are, and that's really tough when they're trying to figure that out and there's abuse being thrown at them, whether it be from a parent or from somebody who they trust, like a friend or a boyfriend or a girlfriend. And so this is something that I see is extremely important to be bringing young people to, especially our kids from H2O, and that's why we do it every year, is to go out there in October and to let them hear from the speakers, let them experience the march, and let them see what they can do if they're wanting to be an upstander or if they're in that situation of being abused.
Mm-hmm. Aaron, like you're in the medical and clinical part of it, and we're definitely going to get into a lot of details more into it. How does it play to you be part of this panel group now?
I think that a reason why I wanted to be a part of it is because I work with domestic violence offenders in my groups, and a lot of times there is a stigma related to expectations of what people think these individuals might be like. And a lot of these individuals look just like those of us sitting on this panel and have made poor choices or haven't learned communication skills, how to manage conflict in healthy ways. So a lot of what we do in our group work is teaching some of those skills with our clients. I have both male and female offender groups, and I also have teen clients that have been arrested for domestic violence. And I think it's important for all of us to learn some of those healthy communication skills and conflict management skills in all of our relationships.
Doctor, what are some of the concerns that you have coming in your office that would relate to domestic violence?
What I see a lot of, and this is a rather new way of looking at violence, is really about communication violence. Number of years ago, I got involved in a movement called nonviolent communication. And whenever we label and judge people, that really is an act of violence. And so I see those behaviors in couples and families who come into my office for counseling, that they've fallen into these patterns, and while they may not be physically violent with each other, they certainly are verbally violent. And there are many places in our society where that's very acceptable. We live in a society full of contempt where we talk to each other and just looking down on each other. And what we know about contempt through research into relationships is that contempt is like sulfuric acid to love. It absolutely destroys it. It is toxic. And so one of the first skills I teach my clients when they come in for help is to eliminate contempt and to learn to talk to each other, and especially in the context of conflict, like Aaron mentioned. That's where a lot of the issues start to bubble up. And so teach them how to talk in ways to each other that they can actually communicate about the issues instead of fighting about the words they're using to fight with.
Wow, that's huge. Pat, tell us how this looks. Citizens Against Domestic Violence, that event that night, tell us how that looks. What's going to happen that night?
So our event is on October 13th. It's at the DuPage Township Levi Center. It starts at 5:30, goes until about 8. It starts with a resource fair, so between 5:30 and 6-ish. There are going to be nonprofit organizations that supply services to people that might need assistance with some kind of a problem that they're having. So that's our resource fair at 6 o'clock. We'll open. We're very grateful that the VFW will do our opening ceremony. And of course, you are our honorary chairperson. You always open our event as our chair. And we will then do introductions. We will have a survey. And that's pretty basic. We do a survey asking people, and it starts with very simple. It's a Bell survey. Very moving, but very simple. Have you ever been in a relationship? And people ding, ding, ding it. And then it goes on to more questions. And as we do that question and question and question, eventually you get to more specific types of abuse maybe people in the audience may have experienced. It's a very quiet, very solemn moment, but very powerful. After that, we generally open our discussion to our, whatever the topic is this year again, relationship ABCs, healthy versus unhealthy. And then we have a moderator, Carolyn Kahn, Bridges to a New Day, who has been on our committee forever, I think. And she's been a great asset to us. And she will be our moderator, and she will be leading our panel in some questions and answers that we hope to provide them. One of the things Sandy, I think, and Aaron and even Ryan alluded to was, how do we identify unhealthy relationships? Most people, is that okay or isn't it okay? They don't even stop to think the harm it's causing when they do that. Or if somebody is causing them harm, they dismiss it by saying, well, it's my nationality, it's this, it's that, instead of identifying. And then certainly providing people with tools. So it's always our goal is to identify abuse, and then educate, and provide tools that they can then take out into their lives. And I'm passionate, as you know, and everybody knows that I'm involved in this town, it's always my passion is to help the youth. Because I believe fully if we can educate our youth about what's healthy and what's unacceptable and not acceptable, then that when they are adults, they stand a better chance to have functional and healthy interpersonal relationships. So that's my passion, and so I'm always trying to gear it towards, like 2 years ago, our topic was cyberbullying, and we had the state's attorney come out and did a technology and cyberbullying presentation, and the youth were really, I learned things as an adult, and I know that the young people were really appreciative. So yeah, so I'm excited about this opportunity. This is different for me. I usually have one speaker. We've never had a panel, but I hear we've done this
Right,
before, and it
right.
was well received. And I like that we have it, again, from 3 different perspectives. Ryan working with the youth, teaching them how to supply and how to develop support systems for themselves. Erin coming from the position of working with abusers, and then Sandy, of course, working with all of the above in her profession. So it's going to be, I think, a very informative and very, very beneficial presentation.
Reverend, what are some of the organizations that will be there that would support that night? I know you've worked with the police department for a number of years, and what are some of the stories, or I should say, I wouldn't call them stories, or some of the morbid type of incidents that's come in your direction that you have to deal with on a day-to-day basis?
Well, being with the police department, yeah, you're right. I get called on things that people, when they look at television or go to the movie, we get a chance to see it firsthand, and it's not a movie. You get a chance to deal with suicide. You get a chance to deal with depression. And you have to stop and understand where that depression is coming from, because depression comes from many different areas. Depression can come from between a man and a woman, and someone threatened the other to do one thing or the other. And now I got to prove that I'm in control, and the way I can prove that I'm in control is that I'm going to show you that I can control how I leave here. So those are the things that we deal with. And so when I come to Citizens Against Abuse, I'm on the watch for any type of abusive situation. I once had a lady that told me, she says, well, I don't feel that he's abusive, yet the man broke your ribs. He threw a table at you. Then when you got out of the hospital, he picked you up and threw you down on the ground, but you say you don't believe that's abusive. Ma'am, that's abusive. And you have to counsel them to the point where you get them where they will say, well, I need to get an order of protection. Because we can't do anything until they do something, but you got to counsel them to get them to realize that this person doesn't mean you any good. This is not love. So when we get called out, we see abuse on many different levels. We see abuse when the children are actually abusing the parents. I was called in on a thing where the child was 9 years old, and the mother was afraid of the child, that the child was going to beat her up. I couldn't understand that. I couldn't identify with that. But, you have to stop and you have to just say, wait a minute, let's listen. Let's pull out everything in this area and see what we can do to help this situation, to encourage this mother. Look, you got to train this child. You can't run from this situation. And so sometimes it is that the parent figure that, I can't train them because the police department will come lock me up if I do something. And, me and a few of my cohorts that we were there, and we explained to the mother that, no, we're not going to stop you from training this child. What we're going to stop you from is abusing this child. Now, if you take this child in the collar and you want to hit him upside the head or in the face, that's abuse. But if you take a strap and whip his behind, then that's not abuse. That's teaching him. And so, you have to be aware of the difference between abuse and not abuse. And, other than that, I remember one of the officers explained to the lady, says, ma'am, it's just like having a puppy. If you got a puppy and you let him run through your house and he does his business and you never train him, when he gets older, he's not only going to do his business in your house, but he's going to terrorize your house. You're going to be afraid of him because he's going to turn on you as well. But if you train him while he's small, then when that puppy get older, that puppy will always respect you and listen to your commands and do what you request of it. So it's the same thing with the child.
And I know a lot of this is in denial, and I'm sure the doctor will get into that. Brian, when you're dealing with young people, how difficult is it to relate to that when some young girl or boy comes up to you and say, I've been abused for years and I don't know how to deal with that? What is your message to them?
Sure. I mean, relating is difficult in the sense that it's not something I went through as a youth. And so it's not that I can relate in that situation, but can relate to the feeling of being scared or the feeling of feeling alone or just having a relationship that isn't the way that you thought it would be. And so those are ways that I, as a mentor towards them, can interact with them. But more of it is empathy and empathizing with the situation and realizing that what's going on in their life isn't fair and shouldn't be happening, and that I'm in a position that I should do something about it. I used the word upstander earlier, and just being somebody who's on their side and walking alongside them and through that. And so, and I think that's what we can educate a lot of people at this rally in October on, is how you can go next to someone, even if you haven't been in that situation before, but what you can do as a friend, as somebody they confided in, someone they trust. And so just helping people develop that empathy, I guess, is going to be important for us at this rally, because luckily we have a lot of people coming out that night who aren't in abusive relationships. There's more people there than there should be who are in those abusive relationships, but luckily not everyone there is. But everyone there can be a part of these people's lives. So if somebody's struggling, it's going to be walking alongside them and letting them know that they're not alone in what they're going through, that either you can relate, like I was mentioning earlier, with the feelings that they're feeling, and you're not going to let them do this alone. And I think that happens too much with people who are being abused, that they feel that feeling of being alone, and they just kind of keep letting it happen because nobody's on their side, and if they speak up too much, they might get more abuse coming their way, because the only people who are listening are those who are already abusing them. And so something I want to express through this night is how we can build those communities around ourselves before we get in those situations. And especially when we're young, start when you're young. Start finding that group of people who are positive in your life, and who it's not going to be weird for you to say you're struggling with something, that there's already that comfortability there to know that, hey, we're all struggling with something, and it's okay to share that because we're going to go through this with you. So,
I'll ask you the same question. How do you deal with that? I mean, because you're in the clinical and medical part of it, and you can actually counsel people. How do you deal with it on a day-to-day? What kind of message are you sending the people that come to you?
Sure. Well, with my individuals who come for my groups, it's interesting because a lot of them have learned some of these behaviors and things from their family system. And so they've grown up in households where there's been abuse or been unhealthy forms of communication and unhealthy ways of managing conflict. So they've never been taught healthy skills. They've never been taught that they have control over their own actions and their own words and their own behaviors. They've also not been taught, as he mentioned, some of those skills of empathy. They haven't learned how to put themselves in their victims' shoes. Many times as well, the individuals in our groups have been in a series of unhealthy relationships where from both sides there's been abuse. Many times as well, they think that if I don't touch the individual, if I don't hit them, if I don't slap them, then it's not abusive. So teaching them all of the parts of what are things in communication that could be perceived as abusive.
Doctor, she touched on some things as well, and I'm sure you'd like to touch on the denial part of it. But when a person says that, well, I haven't put my hand on them, I mean, how can you say that I abused that person? Let's talk about that. I mean, abuse comes in different type of forms.
One of the things I like to do is to talk about what is a healthy relationship. We hear a lot in our society about, excuse me, unhealthy. So what is healthy? The simplest definition I know is a healthy relationship is a relationship where each person in the relationship is encouraged to reach their full potential. And if you're calling someone names, if you're making jokes at their expense, if you're not giving them emotional support, if you're not helping them to realize their dreams, their goals, their aspirations, that's abuse. That's not health. That's destructive. I often like to quote Corinthians to my clients, where it talks about in the Bible what love is, right? It's talking about God's love, but that's what we're supposed to emulate, right? So love is patient, love is kind,
That's right.
love is, I don't remember it all, you can help me, love is not boastful, it doesn't insist on its own way. Love is a verb, it's not just how we feel, because we don't all feel loving all the times. There are times, I've been married 40 years, and there's times I'd like to give my husband a piece of my mind. I don't. Sometimes I do, I'll take that back. But it's how you do it, right? And you do it in a loving way. However, I don't always feel loving, but people who are good at relationships, what they do is they keep looking at the positive in the other person instead of the negative. And so what is it I love about my husband? Right? And if I do that, if I'm consistently doing that, it takes effort. But if I'm doing that, I am not going to abuse him.
That's right.
I'm not going to talk down to him. I'm not going to treat him with contempt. But I'm going to treat him like the gift he is in my life. Most people, when they're being abused, do two things. They deny or they diminish. My favorite story of that is a young woman I worked with many years ago whose boyfriend beat her with a frozen chicken. And he beat her so hard, she almost died. She ended up with migraines for the rest of her life and hearing loss. And when I talked to her about this, she said, well, Sandy, it was only a chicken. I said, well, if it had been a turkey then, would that have made a difference for you? Would be the wake-up call? So that's how strong denial can be. Or it only happened once, or it wasn't that bad. And so part of it is what we do is what we call normalize. And so in an abusive relationship, so, you know, does he hit you a couple times a day? Oh, no, it's not that often. Maybe only once a week. But then you get the truth out when you kind of go higher than
Right.
what's expected. And that's one way we help people to recognize, you know, and to break through some of that denial. But I have to say, as a clinician, one of the hardest things I do in my work, be it with abusive relationships, addiction, mental illness, is breaking through the denial. It's a tough job.
Well, now, Pat, we know that abuse has no boundaries. It has no ethnicities. Let's talk about that. Judge comes in on the court. She's got all kind of makeup on because she was just in an abusive relationship last night.
So, you know, and exactly that's it. You look at your friend, your neighbor, your who. We talk about that with, you know, who on your left or right is hungry and you don't know what they're going through. It's the same thing with abuse. It could be somebody who looks like they're in the best of relationships when they're out in public and they're communicating and it seems respectful, but you have no idea. And that's, I think, going to what Ryan said earlier, having those support systems where you can go and talk to people, because it doesn't, yes, if you've got a black eye, it's visible, but the emotional abuse that goes with some of these other disrespectful ways human beings treat one another that are abusive, the diminishing, the withholding funds, withholding medication, distancing people from their families, they're all forms of systematic abuse. They're grooming for something that's far worse. And so helping people to identify, it's not, by the time you get to that punch in the face, you probably should be identifying this way back, and that's our goal with Citizens Against Abuse, is to provide them with the tools to understand this behavior isn't healthy. It's not the chicken on the side of your head. That's the, now we're getting to the extreme, but identify it here so that you can make some choices. But really the very biggest part is the fact that we're talking about it. 15, 20, Sandy, you could probably, years ago, there was no way people could, number one, admit they were in abusive relationships, number two, get help, or that there were resources available to them, whether that was from the police department to their pastor, you're committed to love your spouse no matter what, find a way to, all kinds of ways this would not even have been looked at. So we have come a long way, but we have only just begun the journey. of truly educating people and helping them to realize the tools that they have, and then to get that out into the community and help people to embrace that and truly live it. And it's getting harder with society seems to be decaying. You know, here we are fighting the society is decaying, you know, relationally, and you know, and we certainly see that all across the board on some of our TV shows and politicians and everything else. But you sit here and you go, that isn't for our kids especially. That is not normal. What's normal is building one another up and loving one another. And so our goal, we're fighting that downward spiral of society by trying to educate and embrace and give tools to people. But they want them. People don't want, they just don't know what to do. They really don't. They don't know what to do. And so the more we can give them, I think the better off. They'll have more choices to make.
Now, Pastor, would you say also, that you hit on a number of different real good points, would you say that TV, the media, has really glorified that and taken the sincerity out of it?
Yes.
Where people really can't wrap their hands around it because, hey, it's happening on TV. It doesn't look like it's a bad thing.
I would say yes, it is. And then not only that, you got to stop and look at it in a different light. A lot of times abuse leads to depression. So when a person commits suicide, you got to first, that's, you know, all this goes into the pot when a person commits suicide. You got to find out what that person abused. Because if they were abused, you know, you read on the news, in the newspaper about a young girl. She was being abused by her peers. And what did she end up doing? She ended up taking her own life because that was her only way to show that she had some kind of control. And so, yeah, the television glorifies abuse. You see the television, if you're watching a movie, you see the man, he jumps up and he beats up the woman, or the woman beats up the guy, or you see this friend beat up that friend, or, you know, all of this stuff. And seem like the television, the movies say this is okay. This is what's supposed to go on in life. And we're saying, no, this is not supposed to go on in life. A person can't say, I love you, and then turn around and then try to kill you, because that ain't love.
Right.
And so when we say that we're against abuse, we're against the whole cadre of abuse. We're not just singling out one sector. We're putting it all together and saying we're working to create a stance on every level of abuse there is. You know, that's why every year we change our theme to something different, because there's so many levels of abuse. And like Pat was saying, 20 years ago, people didn't talk about abuse. It was quiet. It was in the house. If the woman was being abused, she didn't say nothing. I mean, she wouldn't even tell her girlfriends, hey, look, this man is beating me up. But see, today, we finally got people that are saying, wait a minute, I don't have to take this no more. That people know that I can cry for help and get help. You know, the system, the police department now has taken a different approach on abuse. Whereas before, you know, well, oh, that's just a husband and a wife, they'll get over it. Now they're realizing, wait a minute, if we don't step in, one of these individuals could be dead. So now it's now become critical and more important to us. So now that when we look at it with a better eye of saying, look, let us stop it now. And that's what we're working to get every individual, regardless to what kind of abuse it is. Like I say, it could be somebody that's disabled. I mean, I've seen disabled people being abused by their own children. You know, so we have to stop abuse when it starts, because if we stop it where it starts, then we can start to live a better quality of life and not a quantity of life. So that's what we're looking at when we talk about Citizens Against Abuse.
So how can you, Doctor, I'll give this to you. So how can you minimize or combat these type of abuses when the abused would say, you know, he loves me or she loves me. You know, we got a long life to live together. We got kids. I can't leave home now. I got some kids I got to raise.
When a person comes in and they're in a relationship that is dangerous, one of the things I do is I emphasize what the consequences could be, and that there are resources out there that can help them. I'm one resource, right? I do something pretty specific, but there are domestic violence shelters. There are programs for victims as well as abusers. There are just so many resources that exist that can help the person who's going through this. And so I work to plug them in. Another thing I do to try to work against denial is to develop a safety plan. That's one of the first things all of us do when we're working with someone who's abused, is to make sure that they're safe. And so there are things that we teach people to do in the event if things would escalate and get increasingly violent, ways they can protect themselves and get out of the situation, and then where to go for that help.
So what are some of those things that you tell them? What are some of those safety plans?
For example, keep a set of keys outside the house, your car keys. And if you're being abused and the abuser won't let you grab your purse and get away, you got keys outside, so all you have to do is run outside, grab your keys, and go. Keep a set of your important papers somewhere outside the home. And so you don't have to worry about gathering up all those things you need, for example, and if you need to run away quickly, you've already got the copies of them somewhere. Those are just a couple examples of the kind of things that we teach people. The domestic violence programs are great at helping people develop even more elaborate safety plans. You know, things like, this sounds a little silly, but for example, if you're kind of fearful, you can keep a can of wasp and hornet spray. It's legal. It shoots from about 12 feet away, and it burns more than mace, right? And so if you're fearful of someone coming, I had a woman just the other day, excuse me, who was afraid of her husband, who was off his medication for bipolar disorder and was becoming violent. We talked about some of these ways to do that.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, you can get kind of dry in here, and that, believe me, I have to watch that myself. But I think somebody have to have some water here.
Excuse me.
Erin, how do we deal with the kids now? You know, kids that in a domestic violence relationship, how do you deal with the kids? Because they're the victims, you know, and how do you relate to it? How do you deal with it?
Yeah. We spend a lot of time in our program talking specifically about both parenting skills and how domestic violence or violence in a household can impact children. It's interesting that it can impact them in ways that you wouldn't think of. School performance, acting out, withdrawing themselves. There can be a lot of ways that it impacts their behavior in all areas of their life. They can believe that it's their fault that it is occurring. They can blame themselves for that, internalize that. They can show symptoms of depression, anxiety, behavior problems within the school setting. So there's a lot of ways that it impacts the children of domestic violence. So I think it's important that there are ways that we're implementing some skills for some of the parents. So for example, with our offenders in our programs, we teach them ways of communicating with their children so that they're not, for example, bad-mouthing the partner, bad-mouthing mom or bad-mouthing dad, so that they're not utilizing the children as like a bargaining chip in custody battles, so that they're not communicating through the child, adult information, to make sure that they're modeling those healthy conflict resolution skills with their children, I think is super important. Kids are watching what the parents are doing, and if they're seeing violence in the home, whether it's verbal, emotional, or physical, then they're learning those skills from those parents. So I think modeling the behaviors is very important, teaching that.
Would you also say that it is correct, because it has been said so many times that an abusive child that is growing up in an abusive relationship become an abuser themselves?
They may. Not all do, but there is a higher percentage chance that they will enter into that because they haven't learned some of those skills, or they may believe that those behaviors are okay, or they may not know what a healthy relationship looks like because they haven't seen one modeled for them growing up.
Ryan, now what do you have in your program that that actually help young people that you have, because you have a number of young people, you guys have been doing this for a number of years. What do you have in your program to help these young people that come in and not really grasp, you know, the girl gets slapped and, you know, she said it's okay, you know, it's just toying around, or the guy comes in and say, you know, she punched me in my face, but That's okay. You know, what do you send these people? How do you deal with it?
Well, how we deal with it in-house, as far as our organization goes with H2O, is we have a number of programs that go on. And I mentioned support groups earlier, and this is by far the most about these type of situations. And those groups are made up of their peers, and so we keep about 8 to 10 kids per group, 8 to 10 teenagers. And if a student starts sharing about what's going on in their life, those other 8 to 10 kids in that room are going to speak up and say that's not right, for the most part. Some of the kids might be experiencing that same thing and think that, hey, that's normal, but out of that group, there's going to be somebody who is going to speak up against that. We develop such a close group of kids there because they start trusting each other. They're doing fun things together throughout the week, and so they've got each other's back. They speak up when something's not good going on in another person's life. So that happens on real life support groups every Tuesday night. We have mentoring going on throughout the week, and so we have positive adults in this community who come to our program looking to help teenagers, and we put them through a training program to become mentors, and then they work with those students one-to-one throughout the week when those students might be struggling through something at that time, or if they just want to build up that mentoring relationship so they're meeting more often. We do tutoring, we do recreational activities, and we do character education. And even in all of these type of things, you wouldn't think of it, but in tutoring, you're sitting down with a student, and if that student, something they're struggling with, is going to be on the front of their mind. That math assignment that they're supposed to get done is obviously not the first thing they're thinking of if they have to go home to an abusive home. And so those kind of things, our volunteers are trained on kind of spotting or identifying, and to know that tutoring isn't our main objective. Our main objective at H2O is building relationships with these youth. And tutoring is something that kid's coming for and that we're going to help them on. But if something's not going well in their life, we're going to put that math assignment to the side and we're going to talk about that thing that's at the forefront of their thought process at that moment. And so all of our volunteers are trained to be able to talk with kids on these type of issues, and if it goes beyond, if it's deeper than they can handle, we have our youth outreach specialist staff who can step in. We also are mandated reporters, and so we make sure that any of that stuff that's told at H2O, that we go out and we report to DCFS, that we report to the police. And we don't just report it, we walk alongside those students through that process, because it's a scary thing for a kid to be going through that, but then to have to go talk to police officers, talk to adults that they don't know, such as DCFS coming into their house and asking them questions. So we at H2O are mindful of that and want to make sure those kids know we're on their side and that we're walking through this with them.
You know, so often we say that there's no such thing as a bad child, just a child that makes bad decisions. And we tell our security people at the school sometime, and you have a child that walks in, it seems like that child has some really strong behavioral problems. You never know what that child has gone through from the time they left school to the time they come back. How do you work with a child like that, Pat?
From my background, before I owned Nancy's Pizza, my life career was owning preschool daycare here in town. And you're right, to that respect, you're dealing with and seeing the children, and we begin to supply them with these tools as little. I mean, we used to have a program we did every week in our daycare about safe body, safe touching. And so you just introduce it in a way that's just information, but every time you do that, week in and week out, you're empowering them. And then in that conversation, somebody might say, well, sometimes my dad and my mom fight, whatever. Okay, well, that opens up a whole other conversation. Well, what could you do if you're in that situation to keep yourself safe? You know, we teach them how to we taught them how to dial 911, to remove themselves from the room. So you begin giving them these skills at a much earlier age. My generation, when we talk about this, you know, how things have changed, my generation grew up with Daddy Knows Best and Beaver, Leave It to Beaver, who, you know, if you were in an abusive situation at that time, you really didn't feel you could come and tell anybody, because That was what was normal. Now on the other, flip that coin, because we flipped it completely. Now all of our youth, and me and all of us, are watching reality TV. That's nuts, you know, as well as the media, and it's flipped the coin. So now they're thinking, oh, this crazy is normal. You know, so that education, that component of educating our youth, our children, our families, our communities, and I think we do an amazing job in the community of Bolingbrook doing that. There's a lot of resources, and that's one of the things on the back of our brochure. And as I mentioned earlier, our resource fair, there will be many of the services in the community that are available to help people. They will be there, but also just in the privacy of your own home, if you get one of our brochures, there's a resource tab on the back that has many numbers of nonprofit organizations that will point them in the right direction. Where can they get some assistance? They may not be the one specifically to be able to help them, but they'll direct them to different places. So I'm very proud of the community that we live in. No community is without problem, but I think we are committed community to try and continue to find the answers and to provide resources to our youth and to adults and seniors, as you say.
And you know, I noticed that a number of churches are starting Citizens Against Abuse or Domestic Violence program now, and I go to St. Francis, and I've been asked to start up a domestic violence program. If you have come to the church, pastor, and spoke at it, because it's so much is out there. And right inside the church, you got a number of people that just came out of an abusive relationship the night before. So how do you deal with that? Question now, if you had a person that was sitting there and saying, you know, I am in a domestic violence relationship right now, and it is very serious, where do I go for help? Can you give me some names, some phone numbers, something that I can go to for help? Because that's what this is all about. Anyone can jump on this that may have that.
Well, you have the police department. That's one of the sources. You have various shelters today that you can contact that has resources. You also can contact today hospitals. Hospitals is a safe haven today for certain areas of abuse. So, I mean, there's certain places you can go to rely on getting that assistance that years past you couldn't go to those areas to get that assistance. And even to a certain degree, even the church, because now the church, like you say, is looking more into abuse situations because they didn't realize that the very members that they thought were, you know, just shy and uncommitted and everything, the reason why they were so quiet is because they were being abused and they didn't know how to tell anybody, and they were so ashamed because they figured that they must have done something wrong to have this to be happening to them. And so we as pastors have to open them up and let them know, first of all, God loves you. See, so don't think that God hates you because this individual is doing all of these things. This is a time when you need to open up so that we can get you help, so that we can get you away from this abusive situation. So today you have more people now that will come to the pastor. They may not go member to member, but they'll come to the pastor and they'll say, can I sit down and talk with you? And it's the same thing even when I go into the jail, because, you know, I preach in the jail. I have guys that come to me in the jail and say, Reverend, can I speak to you? Can I get 30 minutes of your time? I got a problem. Whereas they wouldn't go to no one else, but they confide in you because they feel that you will be able to get them some kind of needed assistance. And that's what our job is to find, when we find a need, is to be able to fulfill that need, regardless of whether we can do it or whether we know there's outside areas that all we got to do is make a phone call and get that assistance.
Larry, you're one of those organizations that people come to. If someone says, well, I saw, you know, her on TV, I wish I knew where she was or if I could contact her. Can someone contact you, and how would they do that?
Yes, they could contact me. My agency it's called Family Counseling Service, and we are in downtown Aurora, 70 South River Street. And you could reach out to us. We provide both individual counseling, victim services, group counseling, as well as family counseling, marriage and couples counseling as well. And we could be reached, our agency's main phone number is 630-844-2662, and you could contact us through that.
Doctor, is there someone they can contact as well as you're concerned? Can they contact you as well?
Absolutely. And if I don't have the particular resources they need, I will help them find them. That is, in our profession, part of our ethics, is that if we can't do it, we will help you find what you need. And so if anyone needs help, they can call me at 630-771-0144. I wanted to just say something, too, about if people are going through this, or if people are hurting someone, there is help available, and the help is non-judgmental. We're not judging folks. We want to help them. So if someone is being abused, you need help. If someone is abusing somebody, you need help. We're not here to hurt you. We're here to help you.
That's right. That's right.
You know, I knew this show would go by pretty fast because you're giving out so much information, and it's such needed information because there are so many people need this service and they need this information that's given out. Doctor, what would you like to leave the viewing audience with? What message would you want that person to take away from this?
One thing? Okay, I'll try. It's really hard. What I want to say is that our culture is not healthy. I can't watch sitcoms anymore because they're so full of contempt. When we make fun of people, when we are mean to people, when we make jokes at their expense, that is not funny. And if someone's doing that to you, you have the right to tell them no, and you have the right to get help. You don't deserve to be abused, no matter what's happened in your life. So often I've seen women say, well, you know, I drink a little too much, and that's why he hits me. I'm sorry, I don't care if you drink a whole lot. No one has the right to hit you.
That's right.
All right.
I think similar to that we all have our own rights within our relationships, and we have a right to say what is okay treatment towards us. And we also have a right to say, I'm going to leave a relationship, or choose to stay in that relationship and seek help to work on that relationship. Additionally, that abuse and violence, whether it's emotional, physical, verbal, can impact all of us. And it probably has impacted all of us in our own personal lives. And I guess to be as open and empathetic as we can for anyone within our families and our friends, our churches, our schools that may be dealing with this in their lives, and be there with open arms to help those people.
And I'm sure we've established that abuse isn't always just husband and wife. It could be grandparents. It could be anyone that is being taken advantage of, a coworker at work that's being abused and doesn't know exactly what to do. What would you tell a coworker at work that's being abused by another coworker? And you know, one thing, they don't want to lose their job, so they just kind of keep it secret. What would you tell them?
I would say that speaking up about it and talking to a supervisor or a human resource individual at your employer. Some employers also have some employee assistance programs where you could seek some assistance that way as well.
Right?
I think if I could leave with a couple thoughts. One being, don't feel like your situation's hopeless. There's help, like we've been talking about for the last 45 minutes. There's help out there, and take advantage of it. Take it. Your situation, no matter how far you are in the relationship, whether you're the abuser or the person being abused, there's resources out there to help with what's going on. Stand up, speak out is something we march every year and say loudly. If you don't speak out, there's not going to be people there to help you. And saying that, I'd like to talk to the people who are the upstanders, those people who somebody's spoken out and said that they're being abused. Take it seriously. Don't just brush it off. Don't just ignore what they said. It's challenging. It might be awkward. It might be something you don't have time for, but that person's life is at risk, and they confided in you, and they might not confide in anyone else. And so if somebody shares with you that they're being abused and that they're in an unsafe situation, do all you can to walk alongside them to find help for them.
And people have to understand, when you go and talk to an authority figure about abuse, it's not the first time you've heard this. You know, so you're not the only person that have come to them with an abusive message, and they need to understand that. So often people say, well, I don't want to bother them because, you know, they got their own problems, so I'm not going to take my problems to them. What would you tell that person, Reverend?
I would explain to that person, regardless of what you're going through, anyone that is concerned about abuse will make sure that if you go to them, that they will give you the utmost, first of all, attention. And then number two, will lead you to the areas of, or the people that can actually assist you best in overcoming what you're going through. Because one thing about it, regardless to what you're going through, regardless to what I may be thinking, at the time that you're going through it, your problem becomes more important to me than anything else that I might be thinking. Because I know at that point, I may only have minutes or seconds to help you to get somewhere where you are safe versus your life being threatened. Today, it's so important that we reach out to folks versus to say, oh, no, it doesn't matter, because yes, it does. And if we don't do something, that person that we take and say, well, you know, their problem is not as important as mine, could be the person that we read about tomorrow that is dead because we refuse to assist them. At that point, we put our own self in jeopardy. So no, anytime a person comes to me, regardless of what it is, they got the utmost attention from me because I know it is important.
And Pat, what would you tell a neighbor? You know, they hearing the wife scream every night, but they thinking, okay, seeing her run out the house, every now and then seeing her with bruises on her face. What would you do? Because so often people say, I don't want to get in somebody else's business. It's not mine, so I'm not going to get involved with that. What would you tell that neighbor?
So, you know, I think one of the things Ryan's mentioned it more than one time, stand beside them. So if I am a person that I reach out and become a person that person feels comfortable, I don't even bring up the fact that I heard them screaming the night before, but if I become their friend, they may eventually choose to confide. And when they confide, I may not have the answer, but I can, again, point them to somebody else. And then they may not have the answer, but they'll point them to somebody else. And the reality is we know that most people who are in unhealthy, dysfunctional relationships or working environments or whatever it may be, it's not something that just gets resolved one time. They say, oh, well, you know, yeah, I want out, but then they go back. Well, I need that job. I need that money. I need the roof over my head. So again, standing beside them, being their friend is so vital. And being their friend doesn't mean turning their back on them when they decide to stay.
That's right.
It means continuing to provide resources, books, a conversation that you've had with somebody else that may be a tool for them. Standing alongside, I think, is the best gift we can give to one another. And today, and I know that we, again, talking about our town, we have lots of resources where there are lots of support groups. A lot of people don't have insurance or they don't have the funds to pay for a counselor. But we have a lot of support groups available in our churches that provide for, you know, all kinds of small groups. Just begin to reach out. And as a neighbor, educate yourself on what are those tools in our town so that if you ever encounter something, you at least have a beginning place to point that person in the direction of.
And I know there are, but can you name some of the places here in this area where a person can actually go that is in an abusive relationship?
So again, on the back of our resource, we a community service council, DuPage Township. We have Bridges to a New Day, which is Carolyn Kahn's agency that is a nonprofit organization. H2O certainly for our youth. Most churches now have support groups inside of them. They don't all necessarily have the same kind, but if somebody comes to your church is saying, for instance, if they come there, you may not have the resource, but you probably know what, say, New Life has, you know, and they may have a support group that supports abusers. Somebody else may have a group that supports children of alcoholics. The resources are, and it's too bad we don't have a compiled place where all those are, because we really don't know. It really is, I have a sister that's disabled, and the way you find help is you put one foot forward and you go here, and then you put another foot forward and go there. But once you begin the journey, and I might pick up only a little bit of information here, might not be enough to make me want to leave or to stand up, but that might point me in another direction. And slowly you build your skills and your belief in you and your desire to have a better life for yourself and your family, whether that's leaving a job that you think, how could I possibly, I gotta keep the roof over my children's head, and if I leave this job, what am I, especially in the downturn of economy we've had, do I dare leave? I've got to stay, although they're being about, but slowly begin to understand there are resources. And today, again, HR, that was something, you didn't have those resources available now. Mental health, mental well-being, now they're mandated, I think,
Right.
to provide resources, where before, if you went for counseling and they found out, you'd be afraid you might lose your job because they found out you went. So things have changed greatly. We just have to keep pushing the bar further and further and further to provide services.
Okay, and I know this was about the event of Citizens Again. When is it going to be held and where again?
So our event this year is at DuPage Township, the Levi Center. It starts at 5:30, October 13th. We start, as I said, with a resource fair. Then we have our speakers, and then we, after we close that down, we do a invitation to march, which you lead. We do have police protection, and we encourage people, if you're going to march, make a placard, stand up against abuse, march with it, any kind of thing you want to say about stop abuse. And then also at the same time as that, we also provide an opportunity for those that want a small group, maybe they're in an abusive situation, something that may have gotten risen by something they heard from our panel. Those people can stay back from the march and have an opportunity to sit quietly and maybe get some of those resources from our people.
Well, I want to thank all of you for being here tonight, because you gave a lot of information that people can definitely use, whether they're in an abusive relationship or they know someone that's in an abusive relationship. Because, you know, telling them and giving this information, because as they say, information is power. You know, and if you can empower someone to take care of themselves and help themselves to where they can get out of that relationship and even help someone else get out of a relationship like that, it makes a big difference in our society today. I want to also thank Bolingbrook Community Television, because without these men and women that are here that are taping this, we wouldn't be able to get these kind of programs on. So they take their time away from their families to volunteer this time. They don't get paid for this, they do it voluntarily. So I want to thank them for doing this and being here tonight. But most of all, thank all of you for being here, because you probably saved someone's life. You just don't know that. You probably gave them some information and power to even help themselves save their life. So thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you.
My name is Leroy Brown, and this is Bridging the Gap.